MultiGreen, building attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily real estate through impact investing.
Welcome to the MultiGreen podcast. I'm your host, Randy Norton, and today, award-winning journalist Jeremy Hobson asks me questions about the progress of MultiGreen, especially during this historic period of time. Jeremy is the former host of NPR's midday news magazine, Here and Now, and Public Radio's Marketplace Morning Report, which is the most listened to business program in America. He has interviewed thousands of people in his career, and we are excited MultiGreen will be his focus today. Enjoy our conversation. Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It is great to be here, Randy.
So you have a very impressive career interviewing people, and now we're going to have the opportunity to have a conversation about sustainable housing and attainable housing and how technology is enabling that. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Well, you know, Randy, it's great to be here and such an important topic as well. I was just thinking as I was getting ready for this that I was at a town meeting in the town where I live in Massachusetts, and this was in the early fall, and there were a number of issues on the docket for the people of the town to vote on, and the only two that were at all controversial were about putting money into affordable housing there. And there were, I don't know if you've ever been to a town meeting like this, but there were residents that got up on both sides and they said various things. And on one side, they were getting up and saying, we don't want to put any more of our tax dollars into this. And then there was this guy who got up and said, hey, everyone, don't know if you've noticed, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're having this meeting outside because of that. And the real estate market here, as in many places in this country, is on fire right now. Everybody wants to come to a place like this, but the essential workers of this town are in real trouble. They need affordable housing. And how could we not spend money on this to help them? And in the end, the town overwhelmingly voted yes, and the Affordable Housing Fund got the money. But it just brings me to what you're doing here, which is to address this issue that so many people are facing, which is a shortage of real attainable housing.
It's an incredible issue, and it's a story that is repeating itself across every township and municipality in the United States and throughout the world. This is becoming, and it was already before the pandemic, the issue of our time. And I think once these vaccines, have the COVID-19 solved for, I think you'll see the headlines again take over with this affordable housing and attainable housing issue. And I love that story because there are advocates out there becoming more educated on this topic. And instead of the not in my backyard syndrome, the yes in my backyard syndrome is starting to take place.
Well, so people that have been listening to your podcast know that MultiGreen Properties wants to address this issue by constructing 40,000 attainable, sustainable, tech-enabled multifamily homes by 2030. So let me first just ask you why you think MultiGreen is unique at this moment in this landscape.
Jeremy, that's a really good question. We are not the only answer. We believe that we are one of the many solutions. And I believe that it is necessary to take a lead in finding a solution. I would say if there's three distinct things we're trying to do here at MultiGreen, it's collaborate, it's to advance the technologies, and we're trying to be intentional with our capital. And I think we've done that, and I can just explain a little further. From a collaboration standpoint, we're really looking to the Ashby-Monk model for collaborative long-term investment theory. We're trying to get out of this short-termism that all investors have a challenge with, in that most investors are incentivized to do short-term investments because they're incentivized that way. The sooner they can realize their profits, the better off they're going to be. But to really address these systemic issues, we need to take a long-term approach. And I think the private sector is answering that call. I also think that the public policies have failed us, and we need more collaboration with the private sector. So we're looking to the leaders in real estate, finance, and academia, and in government to try to bring back this yes in my backyard philosophy. And from a technology standpoint, I think that's another thing that we're different with. being that we're coming from a data center operations and development perspective, we are really technologists first and finance professionals second. And so because of that, we're really spending a lot of time in research and empirical data. We believe in competing on analytics, and to do that, you need the data. So we're investing very heavily in our R&D and in our technology map, our operations model, our owner program requirements, our design guidelines, all around technology, and specifically what's called BIM, or Building Information Modeling. And with that, this technology is allowing us to be more efficient with our construction and development. And then lastly, we're really fortunate to be working with about 60 of the world's leading families. And all of us collectively are being intentional about addressing this specific issue. I don't know if there's any other collective with such hyper focus as ours in addressing this issue. And I think by doing so, we're going to create social equity through social value investing.
Well, and give me an example of that. When you talk about 60 families, think about one that stands out to you, something that has come to this project because of some of the people that you've been working with.
Sure. Well, I'll just use our family as an example. Green Mesa Capital, we are a single family office that has been in this space for a very long time. And we are one of the 60 shareholders at a group called IX Investments. And IX Investments is a group based out of New York and LA. It was founded by Trevor Nilsson, who had some background and training at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also Howard Buffett. And together they have basically brought together about 60 families. And that is our syndication pool for investors in all the projects that we do. So Green Mesa Capital, by way of expertise, we raised our hand and said, hey, listen, I think we know how to address this attainable housing issue. Let's go do it together. And I think there's many families that have core competencies and expertise that with the proper backing and staffing can take on initiatives like this.
I want to ask you about the three pieces of this, the attainable, the sustainable, and the tech-enabled. And let's start with the attainable. Who do you imagine will be living in these multifamily units?
That's a really good question. When we are done constructing these units, that we're going to price them about 5 to 10% below our Class A luxury type units that are in our peer comp set, that it's going to be affordable for the police officers, the firefighters, the teachers, specifically the healthcare workers. One of our projects is directly across the street from the brand new hospital in the city of Henderson. But you can look at retail clerks and the like, and by definition, those are the workforce. But it's also synonymous with what's happening this year with COVID-19. And these are the same working type that are being labeled as the essential workers. And so I'm hoping that we can target those families that, they have great income, they have great credit, and in many instances, they have nicer cars than you or I, but they're being priced out of entry-level homes.
By the way, you mentioned COVID-19, and I wonder how the pandemic has affected what you're doing. And I just think of, and I'm sure you remember this because you're in Nevada, when they were building the big city center development on the Strip in Las Vegas, the financial crisis happened right in the middle of it, or right before they were done with it. But they kept going and they did it. How has the pandemic and the economic consequences of that affected what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I'm here in Henderson on the Green Valley side. I go down to the Strip maybe once a month and just kind of drive through and check it out. And on the weekends, it's active. It looks like, the normal Vegas timeframe, but they're obviously, I think at half capacity or a quarter capacity in some instances. One of my best friends is the treasurer at MGM, and he's just telling me stories of how their properties are struggling and how they're, dealing with some of the vacancy issues. But I think other than the Strip, the MSA generally has been very resilient from an eviction standpoint. The state of Nevada has put a moratorium on that. From a performance standpoint on these properties, there is about 400 basis points increase in vacancy. Year over year, Nevada has had some of the highest rent growth in the country. and the vacancies has ranged between 2 and 4%, meaning we're in the 95th percentile of having full occupancy. And what that means is we're really at 100% occupancy because you're always turning over some units and making them ready for release. So right now, if we're down an additional 4% in our vacancy, that's really good compared to what's going on, I think, in some parts of the country. I think actually New York and other tourism centers are probably hit worse than Las Vegas.
But so for MultiGreen properties, the pandemic has not sidetracked you?
No, in fact, if anything, it's increased and elevated our business. We have actually closed 4 transactions this year in our very first year of business during this struggling time of the pandemic. And it's because I think lenders and equity participants realize that the fundamentals haven't changed. The demand is greater today than it was a year ago, and prices are continuing to increase to construct these assets. But if you look at the historical perspective of the multifamily asset class, it's continuously outperformed any other property type. And so I think there's a flight to safety. And when people are looking at their retail properties, their malls, the hospitality, there's not many property types that are performing, but multifamily is one.
Let's talk about the sustainability piece of this, because that is a key part of MultiGreen. It's right there in the name. We know the reasons why it's so important right now with climate change and everything else, but why does it matter in the case of housing and to the consumer?
Well, in some states like California, they're making announcements left and right of new code that is required just to get a new home constructed, which will also go into multifamily and industrial properties and the like. And if you just look at California as to what's coming across the country, I think over the next 10 and 20 years, you're going to see code enforcement that requires sustainable features, functions, and constructability. And what I mean by that, I think it's with the materials that we select. I think it's with our desire to manage the utilities more efficiently. And we know that over 60% of all of the carbon in the world comes from real assets. And that's a real problem. So if we can be more intentional with the air we breathe, the light that we use, the water that we're drinking, and really reduce the operational costs of these assets, it'll benefit not only the consumer and the resident, but it will also impact the investors, I think, in a very positive way. So what we're doing at the sustainability level is we're saying, okay, all of our properties need to be either LEED certified or Green Globe certified. And to promote health and wellness, we want either WELL certified or FitWell certified properties. And with that standard, I think we're going to make the most impact on our communities over the long term.
And you think the consumer is also very interested in this?
Well, right now, we are building the only green property in the state of New Mexico when it comes to multifamily. And we have had huge demand and interest in pre-lease. And I think as the consumer becomes aware, I think they're going to demand it as time goes on. Certainly, if you look back at what was, around 15 or 20 years ago, we were just talking about iPads. We were still using pagers. We were still...
You're taking me back here, Randy. Pagers, wow.
When I was in school, a laptop cost like $5,000 to $10,000. And the point is, I think the technology has gotten better. And it's become more cost effective to implement some of these strategies that was just totally cost prohibitive a decade ago.
Let's talk about tech, since you just brought up pagers and iPads. The tech enablement piece of this, I must say, I've been trying to make our house more high tech, and I end up with sort of a hodgepodge where some things are smart and some things are dumb. I'd love to have a more high tech home, but tell me about the tech enablement piece of MultiGreen.
Well, it all starts in the design. What we've decided to do is really over-invest in our design strategies. We're using stuff called BIM and building information modeling. And essentially, it's a digital twin, and it's a replica pre-constructed before anyone even moves any dirt on the property. And what that allows us to do is really understand our low voltage and our technology requirements. And it also allows us to future-proof the asset for, technology that might come 10, 20 years from now. And when we have change orders or CapEx 10 or 20 years from now, we're going to know exactly how to test it, do energy models for it, and where to put sensors. And so it all is about the operations of these buildings and facility management. And you can't do that well unless you get involved in the pre-design process. So what we're doing is, at a very bare minimum, we require all of our architects and all of our design consultants to use one BIM strategy and a federated model that brings them all into one comprehensive location. And we use that as our baseline for using automation and in-home technologies, whether that's Internet of Things, energy efficient appliances, solar, cogeneration. It all starts from the energy model that is derived from the BIM and the architectural designs. So we're working very closely as a capital partner. I would like to say one thing. We are first and foremost a capital provider. We are getting more and more involved in the pre-design process because we are the eventual owner. Typically, groups like us are out of the investment 3 to 5 years or so. But when you start looking at a 10-year hold or a 20-year hold, you really want to build these well. And so I'm willing to overinvest 1% or 2% more in CapEx during construction so that we can have a more fluid technology solution. Just one example, what we're going to be doing with the lease-up center and the entertainment facility and the workout room is each bathroom will be designed with one Medic Life toilet. And this Medic Life toilet will have hundreds of sensors. And as you basically purchase an SD card and you select the exams that you want, you can have a more comprehensive, instantaneous feedback loop than going to the hospital, the ER room, or any other, annual checkup. And it's only $20 to get that SD card and that SD card shipped to a laboratory. And this is just one of the examples that I think that, will enhance the lives of our residents just by being forward thinking with tech enablement.
Let me just ask you some big picture questions. How will you know if you've been successful at MultiGreen?
Jeremy, I know that we'll be successful when we can prove this model and construct 40,000 units. It might take 5 years, it might take 10 years, it might take 15 years, but we're going to construct 40,000 units. And once we get to the point where we can have a prototype or get to a point where we can develop a kit, whether it's a garden style complex or it's a podium type product or it's a mid to high rise type 1 construction solution, we want to have consistency and repeatability with our product type. And I think that if we can just change the equity investors to have a longer term perspective and get more involved in the pre-design requirements, then I think there's going to be a fundamental shift in how multifamily is designed, which will then benefit attainable and affordable housing recipients. And my goal here is not just to build 40,000 units, Jeremy. I hope that we can build 4.6 million units over the next 10 years and get our housing demand and supply back to equilibrium.
Okay, and let me then finally ask you, as you think about those kinds of numbers, from the beginning of this idea, Randy, how much has it changed in terms of where it is now versus where you thought it was going to go?
So how things have changed now is technology is becoming not only a luxury, but it's becoming demanded by our actual construction general contractors and subcontractors. When all of this technology works together well, everybody becomes more efficient and effective. There's a statistic, Jeremy, I want to share with you. Over 70% of all labor and materials that get to a job site in construction is waste. And I just learned this from the Construction Institute that the University of Texas puts together every year with their research and their reports. That is really inefficient. If we can just cut out 10% of that waste or all of that waste, that's millions of dollars per project. And this is all about lean construction and integrated product delivery and target value engineering. so that we can deliver these products more consistently and cheaper. So here's one example to answer your question. Today, Boeing can construct a $100 million airplane in 1 week. Yet, to build a $100 million multifamily project, it takes multiple years, depending on regulatory oversight and approvals. That is unacceptable.
And it can't even fly.
That's right. And if you just think about the cost, the time is the most expensive variable here. And if we can just be more efficient with our time and cut that down and reduce our interest expense and our financing costs, my goodness, we can pass those savings on to our residents.
Well, speaking of time, Randy, we are at the midpoint of the podcast, but I know you have some big names coming up in the coming episodes. What is in store? Give us a preview.
Sure. I think that we are at episode 16 now, so we're going to have about 14 or 15 more episodes. Tomorrow, we're going to release Bruce Greenwald, who is the value investing guru. He is the guru to all gurus on Wall Street, and he was one of my previous professors at Columbia University and the Columbia Business School. And then we're going to have Bill Emick follow. Bill Emick recently wrote a book called Social Value Investing with his co-author, Howard Buffett. We're going to have some of the IX team members join us and tell us why they wanted to back and even start this venture called MultiGreen. We're going to have some of the Green Mesa and MultiGreen team members who will discuss what they're bringing forth on the technology side. And we're going to have some case studies. We're going to go look at each city that we're in. We're going to look at various product types that we're constructing, and we're going to have a fireside chat around those about what lessons we've learned. And then, of course, we're going to have a couple of surprise interviews with total superstars.
Well, we look forward to that. I'm now curious who the surprise superstars are, but I guess we'll have to stay tuned.
Stay tuned. And we're just in conversations right now in finalizing those interviews and those schedules. But I do have a couple of questions for you.
Okay. Shoot.
So on each of these podcasts, we ask 2 last questions to each participant. And the first question is regarding the color green. I want you to locate your green. So in the spirit of MultiGreen, what are a few of your favorite green things?
So I was thinking about this and I thought back to when I was a kid growing up in central Illinois and Earth Day, and we were each asked to plant a tree. And I think we all planted maple trees because maple trees were really abundant in that part of the country. And I planted that maple tree, which I hope is still growing. But I think of that because now as a 38-year-old, I grew up in what was then the most environmentally conscious generation in history, a generation of people who believe in protecting the environment and recycling and reusing and reducing unnecessary waste. And now I believe my generation is no longer the most environmentally conscious generation because the next generation after me is, which gives me a lot of hope for a greener future in this country.
That's a great response. That is a really good green that you located. So my last question for you is, it's now 2020 and MultiGreen is at the end of our very first year of operations. And we publicly launched from Davos, Switzerland, at the 50th Annual World Economic Forum. And while there, on the global stage, we announced that we would improve the state of the world by constructing 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily homes. If you had one wish for MultiGreen, what would it be?
Well, first, I wish that you would have invited me to Davos because I've never been and I would love to go. But no, in all seriousness, I wish you success and that you always keep in mind the people who will benefit from what you're doing, from having a home, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to get the most out of MultiGreen. I remember interviewing an architect named Balkrishna Doshi, who had just won the prestigious Pritzker Prize. He's an Indian architect in his 90s. And I asked him what he thought of when he was designing some of his huge, incredible projects in India. And he said that he was thinking of the people who are going to live in them, how he could create an environment for them that will make their lives better. So I would say my wish is to keep the people in mind.
I will keep the people in mind, and I will make your wish come true. I really appreciate you being on our podcast today, and I really hope we can do this again.
My pleasure, Randy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for listening. Join us as we build 40,000 attainable, sustainable, and tech-enabled multifamily homes by 2030. And if you like the content you're hearing, hit the subscribe button. Follow us at Think MultiGreen and sign up to learn more at www.multi.green.